So we're about to pull up our PowerPoint presentation and kind of talk about everything.
Okay, so this is just a quick map of Colombia. As you can see, it's in South America, not too far from the US. It's about maybe a 2 or 3 hour plane ride from Atlanta.
Yeah, it's right at the top of South America. The capital is Bogota. It's right by Ecuador and Brazil and the Caribbean. And so because of that, there's a lot of different geographical features and mountains and oceans and stuff like that. So very cool place.
Indeed. So we're just going to get started with a quick little warm-up question. So I guess you can just put it in the chat. If anyone wants to just give us some idea of maybe what role religion plays in your daily life, either at school maybe or in your interactions with other classmates or things like that. So maybe just a little...
Yeah, feel free to talk with your classmates real fast about the role of religion. And if you guys want to tell us in the chat, we can highlight some of the best answers we get.
Ask them to give you a thumbs up if they can hear.
Okay. Can you guys give us a thumbs up if you can hear? We're still having some technical difficulties.
Okay, good.
All right,
it's just
cool.
one person's having an issue.
Thanks.
So maybe just repeat it one more time.
All right, cool. So yeah, the question one more time is, what role does religion play in your daily life? If you guys want to take a moment to reflect.
You guys want to present your view?
Okay.
Someone said something about food.
Interesting. Maybe I can pull it up on here so I can see that.
Oh, here you go. All right, cool. So someone highlighted that religion plays a role in the food we eat, the music we listen to, and that's all very true. These can, different religions can really influence different parts of our lives in this way, and like the traditions we have for like the food we eat during special times and the music we listen to at different times of the year and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, should we just go ahead on to the next thing?
Yeah. All right. Cool. So we're going to move on.
Yeah, so we just have like a quick little intro focus, another focus. So this is just a short 1-minute clip about a mass, a Catholic mass that took place in a shopping mall in Colombia. So while you're watching it, just kind of think of if you would ever see something like this, maybe in the US, if you think maybe it's an effective strategy to try and get more people to go to mass and have mass be more accessible. So we're going to go ahead and play the video and just keep those questions in mind as you watch it.
So I don't know if you said this, but we can make it as
We create the possibility for everyone to hear Mass wherever they feel good and when it's more convenient for them. A lot of people come to the Eucharist and after they go shopping or have lunch here. It is the opportunity to have the same service without having to travel a lot.
Muy buen espacio porque reúne a muchas personas. It's a very good place because it gathers a lot of people. We think that the noise or people passing by makes a lot of families more comfortable. Because in church, it's easier to hear a child crying or running. Here, it's less noticeable and families can share our space.
Y la familia comparte ese espacio acá. Venir a gimnasia de 8 a 10 de la mañana.
I come here to go to the gym from 8 to 10 in the morning. Then I go home, get changed, and come back for Mass at 11. I go to the supermarket if I need anything, and we have lunch here.
right. Just like a quick raise of hands, if you raise your hand if you think you would see something similar to this in the US.
So a few people raise their hands, but not many. It makes sense.
Yeah, so this is kind of something a little bit out of the ordinary. Maybe if you're walking in a mall and you just saw a bunch of people in church, you might be a little alarmed at that at first. So if you want to type in the chat some of your maybe reactions or responses to this, and maybe what you think about this, and if you think it's an effective method to try and get more people to go to church.
Yeah, and also try and think about what this kind of says about the role of Catholicism in Colombia if you're going to see it in places like the malls. What do you think that says about Colombia and the role of the church? So we'll give you a few moments to think about that and type in the chat. Okay, cool. All right, yeah. So just a few thoughts to keep in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation.
Someone said it's more convenient to go to one place rather than the mall and to church.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I think that was maybe some of the reasoning behind this is that people are already going to be at the mall anyways. And like the one lady said towards the end that she goes to the gym and then she goes to church and then she has lunch, does a little shopping, and so she can get all of that done in a convenient place, which makes it a lot easier for people who may not have the chance to go out of their way to go to church or something like that.
Yeah.
Someone said division of church and state in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So I see it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and move on. So as you might have gathered from before, Catholicism is the major religion in Colombia. And Catholicism refers to the teachings and practices of the Roman Catholic Church. And as Colombia is very ethnically diverse, it's very religiously homogenous. So that means that while there's different people in different kind of regions and things like that on the coast and other things, most people are pretty much the same religion. And while there's no exact way to tell, because the state stopped doing religious data in the census reports, but there have been some recent polls in major newspapers and things like that that estimate that about 90% of Colombians identify as Catholic, and about 85% were baptized in the Catholic Church in Colombia. And so just a little bit of brief background about how it came into being in Colombia. It was introduced around the 1500s when Spain colonized Colombia, and it's been part of the cultural landscape of the country ever since. And like we mentioned before, and we'll get into a little later, there's some variation due to geographical and class differences. But throughout, the majority of people in Colombia practice Catholicism. And then there's some smaller percentages, about 4% of Colombians are Protestant, 3% identify as atheist or agnostic, about 2% are Jehovah's Witnesses or Seventh-day Adventist religions, and about less than 1% are either follow Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Mormonism, Hinduism, or other kinds of indigenous religions as well. And then in some urban parishes, it's estimated that about 85% of Catholics attend Mass every Sunday, which is a pretty high turnout. And then prior to the adoption of the current constitution that Colombia has, which was adopted in 1991, Catholicism was the country's official religion. And so while it still may not be the official state religion, it still holds a very big part in people's lives. And the Colombian variant of the Catholic religion is known as one of the most conservative and traditional in Latin America. So that also affects the way people lead their lives and think about themselves. And they're also among the most devout Catholics in all of Latin America, which is something else to keep in mind as well. And so now I'm going to talk about just a little bit of this influence of the Catholic Church on men in Colombia. So the Catholic Church is largely male, structured, and very hierarchical. And so the priesthood and other positions are reserved only for men. And they can be ordained through the sacrament of holy orders to either be a priest, a deacon, and then later on a bishop or a cardinal or something like that. And then when they become priests, men take a vow of celibacy. And it was earlier, like in the 15 or 1600s, it was thought that men were pure, sinless creatures. And so that was the only reason that positions like the priesthood were reserved solely for men. And then about its influence on women. Women generally take the practice of religion a lot more seriously. They attend church more often, and because this is traditionally served to attest to a woman's general virtues. So it was thought that if people go to church more, they would become better people as well. And as a result of this, women hold marriage in high regard as well, since it is a holy sacrament, and so it's something very important to women in Colombia as well. And also just overall, due to Catholicism, they condemn things such as divorce, infanticide, incest, and polygamy.
Cool. So like you guys have kind of seen, we've started talking about the church plays a major role in a lot of aspects of people's lives in Colombia, including economic status. So just some information about that. Members of the middle and upper classes in Colombia usually had really close ties to the clergy, which is like the people in the church and the religious hierarchy. And that's because most of the people in the church come from middle or upper classes. So they kind of just maintain those ties with these groups. And it's usually the upper classes in Colombia that donate most to Catholic charities and support it with time and money. And rural peasant communities in Colombia practice forms of Catholicism, but they can be kind of different from middle and upper classes because of factors like geographic isolation and the lack of proper religious teachings. And there's still traces of other religions, such as folk religions, that are found in these kind of communities. So you'll kind of see a mix of like Catholicism and like older kind of religions that have been part of those communities. And historically, the church has done things like start social welfare programs and labor organizations to kind of help the working class in Colombia. Cool. And then, as you guys have seen, Catholicism and the church also influence social values in Colombia. So in Colombian society, like important religious rites like baptism, first communion, marriage, these are all big kind of events in Catholicism, and they're also like really big events in people's lives in Colombia. So you'll kind of see the parallel there. And then religious objects and key like Catholic ideals like the Mass and the sacraments are all really part of like shared values as a culture in Colombia. So holidays and holy day celebrations, like those to celebrate a community's patron saint, are really important for bringing people together. You can kind of see in the pictures, people are really brought together by like baptism and like festivals to celebrate like holy day celebrations. The church has significant influence over education in Colombia. I know the church has like a big role. It has a department in the country. It has 2 leading research organizations to help literacy in rural communities and to help like kind of start universities and colleges across the country and help support them. And because Catholicism is key to Colombian society, much of their culture is socially conservative compared to other Western societies. And Jonathan kind of touched on that about how things like divorce and other things that are more open in some places are kind of not looked upon as favorably in Colombia. Cool. And so you can see influences of the church in art and architecture in Colombia. So from the 1700s to the 1900s, Catholicism heavily influenced Colombian art styles with like painting and stuff, especially the art styles Baroque and Rococo. These are 2 styles that were really prominent during this time. And you can see a lot of traces of like church influences. So you can see right there on the screen, the painting Holy Trinity was painted in the Baroque style and kind of shows Jesus and like basically the Holy Trinity You can see influences of there with that painting. Colombian sculptures during this period were usually religious depictions of like art from the Bible and like biblical figures. You can see the statue Cristo Rey. It's a giant statue in Cali. I think it's like 46 feet high or maybe taller than that, but you can kind of see how big Colombian sculptures were influenced and kind of showed figures from the Bible. And then architecture in Colombia has evolved over time with various styles, but religious influences are still present even today in the designs of churches, chapels, schools, and hospitals. And then on the right, you can kind of see two churches in Colombia and see kind of how different time periods and different like aspects of the church kind of influence how the architecture came out. Cool. So like, even though we've been saying that Catholicism is the major one, other religions are still present in Colombia. So next to Catholicism, Protestantism is the second most practiced religion in Colombia. And Protestantism is kind of like a branch of Christianity, like Catholicism. So that's really interesting. I think around 1.5 million people, or 3.5% of the population in Colombia, are Protestant, which is like a huge gap compared to the 85 to 90% that are Catholics. And historically, other religions have kind of sometimes been met with opposition to the church. There's been some conflict at times. Non-Catholics are now guaranteed the freedom of worship under Colombia's constitution. But back in 2002, there were only 12 churches that were non-Catholic that had like the necessary status to legally perform marriages. So you can see other churches even today are still kind of restricted with what they can do if they're not necessarily Catholic. And then, like Jonathan touched upon, 3% of Colombians are either agnostic or atheist, 2% are Jehovah's Witnesses or Seventh-day Adventists, and 1% identify with other religions such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Mormonism, and indigenous religions. So many indigenous religions were practiced by the communities in Colombia before the Spanish came in the 16th century, but very few have survived. By like the 20th century, most indigenous tribes kind of practiced some form of Catholicism, kind of mixed in with their traditional beliefs. So that's really interesting. Cool. So we have some discussion questions to kind of think about what you guys have kind of learned and kind of talk about the role of Catholicism in your lives, or like religion in your lives in an American society. So first question for the older students: how does Christianity's influence in Colombia compare to the role of religion in the US? And for younger students, the first question for you guys is, how is religion important in your life, and how is this like the role of religion in Colombia? So we'll take some time to let you guys kind of think about that. Feel free to type in the chat to us and we'll highlight some of these answers. And feel free to just, talk with your classmates about this. So do you want to read the next two whenever
they're free.
Give them a minute. Maybe we can go on to the next.
One response is public schools cannot have religion in the curriculum in the US.
Do you want to bring that up? Could we talk about it?
Okay, so someone mentioned that public schools can't have religion in the curriculum in the US. And the US, as far as social policy goes and things like that, tends to be very secular and not really favoring one religion. But I guess this could be because, well, there is still some influence of maybe Christianity in some southern parts of the US, maybe not as strong as it is in Colombia. But I think because there's such a big percentage of people in Colombia that adhere to Catholicism, that this really has an inevitable influence on the way people live their lives and really structures the way they think about things and the way they view the world as well.
Other answers. There seems to be a lot of influence in Colombia and it appears to be accepted more publicly.
Mm-hmm.
And some people said that they go to church every Sunday as well.
Right, cool. So yeah, some people have said that they personally go to church every Sunday as well, which you'll see definitely in Colombia. And then someone else pointed out how Catholicism seems to be more accepted kind of publicly than in the United States. And I definitely think that's true. Here in the United States, we kind of try and keep the church kind of separated from other things like church and state. And like, I guess in public, we don't see like people talking about religion as much, and it's not, I guess, as open as it is in Colombia. And that kind of makes sense when like 85 to 90% of like people in Colombia all practice the same thing. Like it makes sense that people are more open to talking about it. It's more of a present point in their life. So.
Someone said, again, Colombia, they have a main religion, where in the US we have many that are practiced widely.
Yeah, and so I think as the younger generation is still growing up now, that they'll be more open to accepting other religions and maybe understanding that Catholicism may be the big religion there, but I think lots of other people are starting to learn about other religions and what they entail, and seeing that they're really not all that different from Catholicism, and some of the traditions and things like that may vary, but a lot of religions have more in common than they do differences as well. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the second question. So for older students, how do you think the role of Christianity will change over time as Colombia continues to become more modernized? So you can think about maybe how this will play out in different sectors, maybe in like the school system, maybe in social policy or public opinion or things like that. And then for younger students, how do you think Colombian people can learn more about other religions in Colombia besides just Catholicism and what they're used to? So like the first one, just take a couple minutes to talk about that with your classmates and then put some of your answers in the chat for us to talk about. It's right here.
And there's a question that you can answer later. It says, when they saw the video about the mom, does it matter to people that it's not the house of God?
Yeah, I kind of want to address it casually.
This is the correct spelling.
Yeah. Hey guys, so we're going to give you a few more seconds to keep thinking. One more thing quick thing we want to bring up is to remember like the spelling of Colombia. It's a very common thing to spell Colombia wrong, like Columbia, like in the United States. But the country, when you actually spell it, has 2 O's in it. So just keep that in mind in the future, because that's a mistake you'll see a lot of people make. But yeah, we'll give you guys a few more minutes and keep thinking about that.
There's a couple answers that you could read. One says, in Christianity, religion was influenced by Colombia.
By praying and singing.
Going to other places around the world. Maybe it's one way they can learn more about other religions, possibly as missionaries. Go to other churches.
Yeah, so someone mentioned that maybe a way to get people to learn about other religions is to travel to other places in the world as missionaries possibly, and spread information and kind of create a dialogue about that. And I think that's a really important thing. And I think the younger generation now is more keen to go outside of the country and visit other places, maybe during study abroad when they're in university or something like that. So I think people will definitely get exposed to that and maybe bring that back to their families and kind of mention like, hey, this is what I learned about this different religion, maybe how it's different or how it's the same as Catholicism, and then maybe some stereotypes of that other religion that maybe were true or weren't true as well.
So talk about technology, you get more exposed to different religions via technology.
Yes, this is true. And I think also with news and social media and stuff like that, people are able to interact with people from lots of different backgrounds more often. And so this kind of creates a dialogue as well.
Okay, cool.
All right, yeah.
All right, cool. So that's all the questions we have for you guys. Now we're going to open the floor to you guys to ask us questions about Colombia in general, or like the role of religion in Colombia, or anything you guys want to ask us. Feel free to just type in the chat and we'll read some questions aloud and give you guys some answers for whatever you guys want. Where's the screen share?
Oh.